Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you very much, conference. There's a Tory and a Labour conspiracy on crime. Both are guilty of putting forward measures to tackle crime that are ineffective or even counterproductive. These parties aren't tough on crime. They're soft on hard thinking and tough choices. And just as our party has changed the public debate on climate change, we need to change the debate on crime and punishment. We need a new consensus on what works, not on what titillates the tabloids. We need common sense, not sensationalism. And that's why we proposed on Sunday a National Crime Reduction Agency to report on the evidence of what works in justice and policing just as thoroughly as we assess medicines in the health service. Instead, we now have a crime debate totally removed from reality. Take an example in July. A Labour Home Secretary announced she would march young offenders into hospital to see the consequences of violence. She ignored the evidence from the United States that such programs do not cut crime, but put it up. And 4 days later, she had to ditch the idea. Or take David Cameron. Cameron knows that you can get 4 years in jail for just carrying a knife. But he thinks that judges tiptoe around knife crime. So he played to the gallery. He wants to send every knife carrier to prison automatically. There's just a small problem. If he did, the prison population would nearly quadruple. The basic rate of income tax would go up by a penny in the pound. Oh, and another problem. The evidence shows it wouldn't work. What works is visible policing to reassure people they do not need to carry a knife. Intelligence-led stop and search of hotspots to catch knife carriers, working with the local community to gather leads and encourage witnesses, telling it how it is in schools and colleges, taking back control of the streets. The conference, Labour and the Tories, are addicted to punishment posturing. And that means legislative diarrhea as a substitute for enforcing the law that we have. In their first decade in government, Labour's new legislation takes the same amount of shelf space as 200 copies of Tolstoy's War and Peace. And it is twice as heavy as John Prescott. Labour has introduced 3,600 new criminal offences since 1997, even though nearly every offence that people really care about has been illegal for years. My favourite is a new offence which shows ministers are getting really tough. You will be relieved to hear that it is now against the law to set off nuclear explosions. Labour and the Tories have pretended that prison is the most effective way of deterring crime. They say that if someone is locked up, they cannot offend. But that ignores the fact that prisoners leave when they serve their time. And the whole point of prison ought to be to stop people re-offending. But if you put a young man into prison for the first time, there is a 92% chance he will offend again. Our prisons are colleges of crime. If prison works so well, why has crime gone down in Denmark while the number of prisoners has gone down? Why has crime fallen in Canada when the prison population is the same. And the government's own top-notch research found no evidence that tougher penalties deter crime. Now, let's be clear. We need prison for serious offenders and for serial offences. But we need reformed prisons that educate and occupy and prepare prisoners for a life outside. And there's another reason why prison does not work well. It's very simple. It's because so few people are caught. For every 100 crimes committed in Britain today, just one criminal will end up with a conviction in a court of law. That's a 99% chance of getting away with it. And if you don't catch offenders, no amount of threatening punishments will work. So if we want to cut crime, we should stop posturing about penalties because they're tough enough. The answer's simple. Catch criminals to cut crime. Labour conference has done the opposite of what works. The average prison sentence has gone up. That's the ineffective bit that doesn't work. Meanwhile, the key factor that does work, the detection rate for crime, has fallen by nearly a fifth since the end of the 80s. If the prison population was still the same as when crime peaked in 1996, there would be enough cash for 25,000 extra police officers. If the ID card scheme were scrapped, we could hire a further 10,000 police officers. That's 35,000 extra police, a quarter extra, on the streets, catching criminals and cutting crime. Of course, conference, more does not always mean better. Year after year, Labour and the Tories have ducked the tough choices on police reform. Sheehy, Flanagan, HM inspectors' reports, they've all come and they've all gone. And we need more police, but we need better policing too. Detection rates, even for serious offences, vary widely from one force to another. For violent crime, just a third of recorded offences are detected in London, compared with 2/3 in North Yorkshire. Spreading best practice would mean more detection, and more detection would mean less crime. Detection works, and that's why police performance matters. Poor performance is not tackled strongly enough. A senior police officer who's lost motivation is usually left alone. And that's not good for morale. It's not good for an ambitious young officer to see Deadwood prosper. The force needs to be able properly to reward not just time served, but effort and talent and skills. Worst of all, police pay has become a political football. Police officers cannot, by law, strike. They suffer the same squeeze on pay and costs as the rest of us, but they cannot get a second job without their chief constable's permission. And in exchange for those restrictions, ministers must accept the recommendations of the Independent Police Pay Tribunal. Police need a pay system fair, independent, and respected. And conference, we need local policing. The Tories and Labour have set central targets that meddle but do not deliver. They have distorted local priorities. And by awarding the same points for minor and serious crimes, they have sucked thousands unnecessarily into the criminal justice system. Central targets mean wasted effort and wasted resources chasing the wrong priorities, which is why they must go. We need local accountability to local people with the powers to set local priorities. And if local people don't like the results, there's an age-old solution. They can get rid of the decision makers. Conference, if the Liberal Democrats did not exist, all there would be on crime and justice from the Tories and Labour would be showboating and grandstanding. And if the Liberal Democrats did not exist, who would stand up for civil liberties? Not the so-called liberal conservatives, who just this summer called for tougher bail conditions, automatic sentences for knife carrying, more prisons, and, astonishing for a party that said it was against a surveillance society, the removal of checks on police surveillance. I just hope that the Conservatives can still be relied upon to vote against more detention without trial or ID cards. Goodbye, David Davis. It was nice knowing you. And if the Liberal Democrats did not exist, Conference, who would rebuild our fading democracy? Not David Cameron, who has gone strangely quiet on constitutional change. I've got a challenge for you, David. Do you even stand by your commitment in your leadership campaign to fixed-term parliament? And if the Liberal Democrats did not exist, who would stand up for our children's future in a time of climate change? Not the Green Tories. The first thing Boris Johnson did when he became London's mayor, and what a mistake it wasn't, Brian Paddock, was to ditch green taxes on the biggest cars. And as for George Osborne, he's already ditched green taxes in favor of cutting petrol taxes. Not the planet's champion, but the gas guzzler's friend. And if the Liberal Democrats did not exist, who would stand up for fairness? Not Labour, who thought it was a good idea to increase income tax on the worst off to give better off taxpayers a tax cut. And not the Conservatives either, whatever they now pretend. David Cameron and George Osborne both abstained on Labour's budget. Remember their first tax cut promise? Abolishing stamp duty on share dealing for their friends in the city. And their second was a cut in inheritance tax for households with £2 million. And we're now told that David Cameron and George Osborne were idealistic young people who cared about fairness. Perhaps they agonized over their options as they adjusted their fancy tailcoats. Mirror, mirror on the wall, which party is the fairest of them all? Tory, Lib Dem, or Labour? Well, when young David and young George were wondering which party to join, they should have known the answer. We had a Conservative government for 18 years. And during that period, the poor got poorer, and the rich got richer, and the gap got wider. And the reason was not some force of nature, but Tory policy decisions that were hard-nosed, sharp-eyed, and mean-minded. A Tory decision to scrap the link between pensions and earnings. Result, more pensioner poverty. A Tory decision to scrap the uprating of out-of-work and in-work benefits. Result, more working poverty. A Tory decision to scrap the uprating of child benefit. Result, more child poverty. These chaps aren't stupid, so why do they think we were born yesterday? George Osborne will go fair when George Bush goes green. And fairness will become a Tory value when hell freezes over, Notting Hill becomes a workers' republic, And the Bullingdon Club affiliates to the Socialist International. And I've got news for David Cameron. You don't make society fairer by hoping for it or by talking about it. You can only make society fairer by helping the poor and the powerless, and that means giving them more money and more power over their own lives. And I've got a challenge for David Cameron. Name a single period of Conservative government in our history when Britain has become more equal. Name a single Conservative measure which even helped. David Cameron, like Tony Blair, wants to be all things to all people. Tories would have us believe they're the party of the environment and of the owners of big cars, of traditional values and of change, of equality and of lower taxes on the best off, of liberty and of removing checks on police surveillance, of European membership for Georgia, and of being the first country to pull out of any part of Europe's treaties. If politics is about making tough choices, the Tory party is about ducking hard decisions. Conference, a party that has every priority is a party that has none. A party with no heart, no core values, and no direction. There's only one party in British politics committed to the environment, and always has been. There's only one party committed to civil liberties, and always was. And there's only one party committed to fairness, only one party committed to handing power back to the people, and only one party for building a world built and based on the rule of law, not the law of the jungle. Conference, Labour can't deliver the change our nation needs, and the Conservatives won't. Only the Liberal Democrats will.